My name is Clara Whitmore, and for most of my life, I believed that a house could hold love. Not just walls, floors, and doors, but memories, breaths, footsteps that never quite left. This house, our 2-story home on the ridge, where the river bends and the wind waits before moving on, was the world my husband, Richard, and I built together every year of our marriage. Richard wasn't a wealthy man. He didn't give me diamonds or luxury. He gave me wood he sanded by hand, stairs he measured 3 times to keep my steps light. A kitchen window he painted a soft, dusty blue because he once said, "Blue makes a home feel like sky, like we always have space to breathe." I didn't know how much that window would matter later, how much breath I would need when Richard passed. The house didn't feel empty, it felt full. Full of his humming in the hallway, full of the warm touch of his palm on my back as he'd pass behind me when I cooked, full of the laughter we built into the walls, without realizing we were building anything at all. And in that fullness, there was silence. A silence that didn't hurt at first, just settled there. Like dust, like memory, like a blanket you don't remember pulling over yourself. The only person who stepped into that silence with me was my son, Aaron. Aaron was all I had left, or at least, that's what I believed. He didn't visit often. Life in the city was fast for him. Sharp suits, phone calls, messages sent at red lights, meals eaten while moving. He came home with the energy of someone who had places to be even while sitting still. But he visited, and I held on to that. He would sit at the same kitchen table where his father once planned weekend carpentry projects. He'd stir sugar into his coffee without tasting it. Tap, 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 fingers on wood, restless rhythm he couldn't still. "Mom, you shouldn't live out here alone," he'd say, eyes darting toward the past written all over the house. I'd just smile and say, "Your father built this place for us, so I stay." Aaron never argued. Not then, but a distance had already begun. The kind that doesn't shout, only sighs quietly across a room. Then one evening, he came with someone else. Her name was Sophie Hale. Sophie was the kind of woman who smiled with her whole face and none of her heart. Beautiful in a way that made you wonder whether she had once been soft, before something sharpened her edges. She moved through my home like she was evaluating it. Eyes scanning wall seams, window frames, foundation lines. Not memories. Value. She praised everything, too warmly, too sweetly, in a way that made the air feel staged. Aaron laughed louder that night, as if volume could make everything feel normal. We ate dinner together. Rosemary chicken, roasted potatoes, exactly the meal Aaron always loved, but he didn't taste it. His fork moved mechanically. His gaze stayed low. When dessert plates were cleared, Sophie folded her hands in her lap. "Clara," she said, her tone gentle, almost respectful, "we want to show you something." Aaron set a thick leather folder on the table. Something in my chest tightened. Small, like a thread pulled too far. Sophie continued, voice smooth. "We're investing in a property development project, a very promising one. If your home is temporarily transferred into the company's asset portfolio, it gives us leverage for the expansion loan." My house. The house Richard built with his hands. The house that held our laughter in the walls. The house that held me. Aaron didn't say anything at first. He didn't look at me. He stared at the folder. His silence said more than any sentence could. "It's just paperwork," Sophie added. "You'd still live here. Nothing changes. Nothing changes." Strange how betrayal always starts with those words. My voice did not break when I spoke. "Let me think about it." Aaron nodded quickly. Too quickly. Relief, not love, and the smallest crack opened inside me. Quiet, like a tear rolling without falling. That night, in the soft glow of the kitchen lamp, I sat in front of the blue window Richard painted, holding my mug with both hands. The silence was no longer gentle. It was watching me, listening, waiting, and I realized something I had never wanted to believe. My son didn't come home to see me. He came home to take from me. A week passed, not a long time, but long enough for a house to feel different, The morning light through the blue window didn't feel warm anymore. The silence wasn't memory now. It was waiting. The folder Sophie had placed on my table remained untouched. Not because I forgot, but because I remembered too much. Every morning I would look at it, and then I would look at the staircase Richard built. The uneven third step he refused to fix because he said, "Things that are lived in shouldn't be too perfect." I ran my fingers along the banister he carved by hand. I stopped in the doorway where we used to slow dance on rainy nights. I sat in the chair where Aaron once fell asleep as a child, curled against my chest, warm and breathing softly. And I wondered when time had changed us without telling me. One evening, as the sun was lowering itself across the fields, I heard the familiar sound of Aaron's car in the driveway. He didn't knock. He still had the spare key. He never returned after college. He walked in carrying a bottle of wine. Not the cheap one we used to share on birthdays, the expensive kind meant to soften truths. He set it on the counter and said, "Mom, can we have dinner tonight?" His voice was trying too hard to be casual. I agreed. I cooked slowly, quietly, letting memories do their work. Rosemary. Lemon. The rhythm of chopping. The small hiss of the pan. Aaron watched me move around the kitchen. But he didn't help. He always used to help. Not long ago, he would be beside me, rolling up sleeves, making jokes about how badly he cut onions. Now he stood with his hands in his pockets, jaw tight. The distance between us could have been miles. We sat down to eat. The plates were warm, the food fragrant, the room soft with evening light. But it felt like we were actors in a scene we both remembered, but no longer belonged to. Aaron picked at his food, barely tasted it. His knee bounced under the table. His eyes flicked to the folder, still where Sophie had left it. Finally, he spoke. Softly, too softly. "Mom, did you look at the papers?" "Not. How have you been? Have you eaten? Are you sleeping okay? Just business." I set my fork down. The sound was small, but it echoed. "I looked," I said. He swallowed hard. "It's the only way we can secure the next stage of funding. Sophie and I interrupted gently. "Aaron." He stopped. I looked at him, really looked. The tired eyes. The clenched jaw. The fear he didn't know how to hide, not greed, fear. "Are things that bad?" I asked. His breath caught, just slightly. Then, very quietly, like a confession said to no one, "If this deal falls through, we lose everything." My heart tightened, so quickly I could feel it in my throat. I reached across the table and laid my hand over his. He didn't pull away, but he didn't hold on either. "You could have told me." Silence. Heavy, thick. Aaron looked away. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I didn't want you to think I failed." I closed my eyes, because I remembered a little boy, bringing home report cards he thought weren't good enough. I remembered him standing in Richard's old boots, pretending to be grown. I remembered him trying, always trying, to be enough. And my voice broke in the smallest way. "I never asked you to be perfect. I just asked you to be mine." His jaw trembled, just for a second. Then, he pulled his hand back, not out of anger, out of shame. He stood up, walked around the table, picked up the leather folder, and placed it gently in front of me, not pushing, just placing. "Please, Mom," a boy's voice inside a grown man's body. "Just sign it." My heart cracked, quietly, like glass under a slow, steady weight. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply said, "Let me think a little longer." Aaron nodded, but his shoulders fell, because we both knew. I had already made my decision, and he had already made his. He left without finishing dinner. The chair across from me was still warm, but I had never felt so cold. Days passed. Not loud days, not busy days, just quiet ones, the kind where your heart keeps moving, but slower. The leather folder stayed on the kitchen table. Some days I walked past it. Some days I touched it. Some days I stared at it long enough that the letters on the cover blurred. I thought about Aaron when he was small. The way he used to run to the door when Richard came home. The way his laughter used to tumble out of him. Bright and uncontained. And I thought about how he didn't laugh anymore. Not really. Not with his heart. One afternoon, there was a knock on the door. Not Aaron. Sophie. She stood on my porch wearing a pressed blazer and perfume that smelled like city lobbies and expensive apologies. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were calculating. "Clara," she said. I was in the area. Thought we could talk. I didn't invite her in, but she stepped inside anyway. She looked around my home again, the same way she did the first time, not seeing history. Only value. She sat at my kitchen table. The same table where Richard taught Aaron to tie his first tie, where birthday candles were blown out, where I learned how to be alone gracefully. Sophie folded her hands. "Aaron is under a lot of pressure." I said nothing. He wants to prove himself, to be someone. I let the silence hold her words. Then she leaned forward just slightly, voice soft like velvet. "He needs your help, and I think you want to help him. But time is running out." There it was, the threat dressed like concern. I sat down across from her, slowly, without rushing. "Sophie," I said quietly. "Why my house?" Her expression didn't change, not even a flicker, because it's the only asset with enough stable equity to secure the investment. I looked at her, really looked. There was nothing cruel in her face. "Just want shaped like hunger. Do you love my son?" I asked, her lips parted. Just slightly, surprise flickered, then settled. "I care about Aaron's potential. Potential. Not his heart, not his healing, not his grief, not his breaking, just his value." Something in my chest folded in on itself, delicate and painful. I didn't speak again, and Sophie understood she had already said too much. She stood up, smoothing her jacket. Her voice was still soft, but now bare of performance. "Clara, if you don't sign, the company collapses. Aaron loses everything." I stared at her, not angry, just finished. "If the only way he can stand," I whispered, "is by pushing me to my knees." Then he was already falling. Sophie froze, her expression flat, unreadable, slipped for just a moment. A crack. Then she was gone, leaving the scent of her perfume like a closing door. That evening, I sat outside on the front steps. The air smelled like pine and faint chimney smoke from the neighbor's house. The sky was bruising into twilight, purple fading into deep blue. Mrs. Barlow came out with a shawl and draped it over my shoulders. She didn't ask what happened. She just sat beside me, 2 old wooden steps creaking, under the weight of years. After a long time, I said, "I don't know if this is love anymore." Mrs. Barlow sighed, looking out toward the trees. "Oh, Clara, love is still there. It's just standing in a different room now." My throat tightened. "What if I lose him?" She didn't answer. Not at first. Then, gently, "You cannot lose what chose to walk." The words landed like truth placed gently into my hands, not heavy, just undeniable. I closed my eyes. The air tasted of autumn, earth, wind, and something ending. The next day, I called Aaron. His voice on the phone sounded smaller than I remembered. "Mom?" "Come home tonight," I said. "Just you." There was a pause, a long one. "Okay." When he arrived, he looked different, not polished, not confident, just tired. His shoulders slumped beneath the weight of something he didn't know how to carry. We sat at the table. No wine. No folder. No. Sophie. Just us. Just mother and son. I didn't make dinner this time. The kitchen was quiet, still holding the scent of rosemary from nights that felt like a lifetime ago. I placed the leather folder in front of him. He didn't touch it. I reached across the table and took his hand. He let me. "Aaron," I whispered, "I know you're drowning." His jaw trembled, his eyes glassed, and then his voice broke. I didn't know what else to do. A tear fell. Not dramatic. Just gravity doing its work, I was afraid, he whispered. I didn't want to disappoint you. My heart cracked clean open. I lifted his hand to my cheek. Oh, sweetheart. You don't disappoint me by falling. You disappoint me by pretending you aren't. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he looked like my son again. Not a businessman, not a failure, not a strategy, just a boy I raised. But love, even when it remembers, does not fix everything in an instant. This was not healing. This was only the moment before it. The moment where truth sits down beside hurt, and they look at each other quietly, together. After Aaron left that night, the house was quiet again. But the silence was different now. Not heavy, not cold, just waiting. Waiting for me to decide whether I would break or stay standing. The next morning, I walked across the street to Mrs. Barlow's house. She was trimming her rose bushes, humming a tune I didn't recognize. Something old, something soft. She looked up the moment she saw my face. It's time, isn't it? I nodded, no words. Words would have cracked my voice in two. She wiped her hands on her apron and motioned for me to follow her inside. Her niece, Emily Barlow, was sitting in the dining room. I knew of her. A real estate attorney who handled quiet battles like this one. The kind that lived between families. Emily stood and shook my hand gently. I've heard about your situation, she said softly. Let's take a look. We sat together at her laptop. She pulled up property deeds, county filings, tax assessments, things I had never looked at because Richard handled all of that with the care of a man who took pride in providing. Then Emily's expression changed. Subtle, but unmistakable. She leaned closer, zoomed in, scrolled. Her voice shifted, quieter, but steady. Clara, did you know your husband filed an addendum to the property deed about 6 months before he passed? My breath caught. I shook my head. No. Richard had been so quiet in those months. Weak some days, gone others, but quiet always. Emily slid the screen toward me. There it was. Richard's handwriting, slanted, imperfect, familiar. A legal declaration. The house was to remain solely Clara's property, not to be sold, transferred, leveraged, or used as collateral by anyone, including Aaron, under any circumstances filed, stamped, recorded. Legal. Binding protected. My vision blurred as tears gathered, not from sadness, from something softer, something like, he knew. He was protecting me even after he was gone. Mrs. Barlow placed her hand over mine, warm, steady. Emily spoke gently. Clara, your son never had the legal right to use this house, even if you had signed and it would not have transferred. Richard made sure of that. My hand flew to my mouth. Not in shock, in memory. Richard's voice echoed in my chest. You are the home. Clara, not the walls. That evening, I asked Aaron to come again. He came alone, no suit jacket. No polished shoes. Just him. He sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where so many of our lives had unfolded. I placed the printed addendum on the table between us, stared at it, read the lines. His face changed. Slowly recognition, realization, and then something else. Something breaking inside. Him. His voice was barely sound when it came. Dad. Protected you from me. A tear slipped down his cheek. Not dramatic, just human. I reached out, and this time, he took my hand. He didn't speak again. He couldn't, and I didn't need him to, because love was still here, wounded, bent, frayed at the edges. But here, just not the same, no longer something small and unquestioned, now something that needed space to grow again, or to end gently. Aaron stood slowly, wiped his face. His voice was hoarse, but true. I need to fix myself before I can come back here. I nodded, because that was the only thing left to say. He He paused at the doorway. "Mom, I'm sorry," and it was the real kind of sorry. The kind that costs something to speak. Then he left. And this time, I did not feel abandoned. I felt free. The house was quiet after Aaron left. But for the first time since Richard passed, the silence did not feel like grief. It felt like space. Space to breathe. Space to heal. Space to just be. The next morning, sunlight poured through the blue-painted kitchen window. The one Richard had chosen because he believed it would make the mornings feel like sky. And it did. I sat with my tea, not to fill the silence, but to enjoy it. The house wasn't something I was clinging to anymore. It was simply part of me. The way love becomes a scar you learn to touch without hurting. A few days later, there was a knock on the door. Not hurried. Not heavy, just gentle. Mrs. Barlow didn't ask if I was all right. She didn't need to. She simply stepped inside, placed a loaf of warm bread on the counter, and sat across from me. We shared tea without speaking. Some friendships do not need words. After a while, I whispered, "He's not bad." Mrs. Barlow nodded. "No, just lost." I swallowed, my throat tightening the way memory does when it brushes old wounds. He went looking for a life he thought was bigger than this one. Mrs. Barlow placed her hand over mine. And perhaps he will now learn how to build one. The words did not hurt. They settled, the way truth does when you are ready to receive it. Weeks passed. The house breathed again. I painted the fence. I replanted the rosemary garden. I opened windows that had been shut for too long. I didn't wait for footsteps in the driveway anymore. Not because I had given up on Aaron, but because I no longer needed him to come home to know I had one. Then, one evening, early autumn, I was out watering the flowers along the porch rail. The sky was brushed with gold and lavender, that soft hour where everything looks like a memory. A car pulled into the driveway. Aaron stepped out, not rushed, not tense, just present. He had no folder, no business tone, no practiced composure, just tired eyes that had seen consequences, and a heart trying to return to itself. He stopped at the foot of the porch stairs. We didn't rush our reunion. We simply stood, there, mother and son, with enough space for the past to breathe between us. He spoke first, quiet, real. "Mom, I am trying to be better, not a promise, not a performance, not a plea, just truth." I nodded, not because everything was forgiven, but because I understood healing had begun. Not at once, not all the way, but enough. He didn't ask to stay. I didn't ask him to leave. We simply sat together on the porch steps, in the same place where he once learned to tie his shoes, where Richard once held my hand under summer constellations. We watched the sky change colors, and I felt something inside me settle, like a heart finally finding the shape it was meant to hold. That night, after he drove away, I stood again by the blue window. The house glowed softly around me, like it remembered every version of me I had ever been. The girl in love. The wife in hope. The widow in grief. The mother who broke. The woman who stood, I whispered into the quiet. Richard. I kept our home. Outside, the wind rustled the trees like someone letting out a long, relieved breath. I closed my eyes. Not to hide, but to rest. Because some victories do not look like triumph. Some victories look like staying gentle, without letting yourself disappear, and in that softness, I was whole again,